Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I have a little piece of fabric with some dots. So I would recommend practicing this if you can. So I wrote a couple different stitches around and just took my measuring tool and measured 1/4 of an inch and tried to keep them the same distance from the edge. So when I'm doing it, they look nice and neat. You can do a double thread if you want, but just know that if you do a double thread and you make a mistake, you do have to cut it and then restart. So the first thing I'm going to show you is something called the overcast stitch. And so you could do this, especially if you're doing applique or something like that. So what I'm going to do is basically just come up through the fabric. So my dots are going to be my guide as to where I need to come up through the fabric. So every time I have a dot, I'm just coming around the edge, and I'll include a picture of this little piece of fabric. So if you want to practice doing this, you can label your pieces the same. And I'm trying to use thread that you can see. If this was a real project, you would definitely want to use a thread that blends in. So an overcast stitch basically just goes around the edge of the fabric. This is definitely one of the easier stitches to do. I'm going to talk about a little stuffed animal kit that you can buy, which is what I bought the last two times I had the 6th graders. And this is the one stitch they have you do for the majority of the stuffed animal. This would also be one of the stitches you would use in applique, which is where you put fabric on top of another fabric and attach it, like a picture. Okay, so when I get to the corner, I'm going to just keep going, but I'm going to teach you another stitch. So just make sure the whole time that you do this that you are consistent with how far apart your stitches are and how far away from the raw edge that you are. Okay, the neater you do it, the better it will look. And what would be seen on the other side, I'll open this up in a second so you can see. So if you were doing this to stitch a pillow or something like that, whoops, I'm caught in here. If you were going to sew a pillow or something like that, you would want to make sure, oh, I'm stuck there. You would want to make sure that you do it tighter. So if you open it up, you can see all those little black lines are where my stitches are. So if you were doing something and it was stretched out, you would be able to see those. Okay, so the next I'm going to show you is a blanket stitch, also known as a buttonhole stitch. So it's very similar to the overcast stitch, except when you go around the edge, and so when you first start the stitch out, it's best to come out of the end dot and then come around and come out of that same end dot. It'll make it look a little bit better. So now I'm going to come up the next dot, and then you're going to pull it until your thread is almost through. So we're going to have like a little circle there. And if your threads become uneven, which mine are right now, you can even them out just by taking your needle. And so then what I'm going to do is take my needle and go through that loop. So I'm going to come around through the dot, and then right before my loop is gone, I'm going to go through the loop. And what this is going to do is put a stitch right against the edge of the fabric. So again, this is a popular stitch for appliquing. It's also, if you do buttonholes by hand, it's the same one. So again, I come around, and then right before I'm about to pull it through all the way, I go through the loop with my needle. I try not to hand sew too much. I mean, I really don't mind it. I would prefer to sew in a machine, but there's some times where you just have to hand sew. And I think it's important to know it, and especially a lot of you may not have a sewing machine. And so if you wanted to actually make any mask, you can use a couple of these stitches for it, which I'll show you. And again, I'm doing these on the larger side, but if I was doing a pillow or something, I would definitely want to do them probably half as, whoops, I forgot to go through the loop. So if that happens, just go on the back and go underneath the stitch and you can fix it. Okay, now the next stitch I'm going to show you when I get to my next corner is the back stitch. So if you watched my demo the other day, I did show you this real quick, but I'm going to show it again. So I'm at my corner, go through my loop. Okay, so you can see there's the back stitch, there's the over stitch. Okay, now, or blanket stitch. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up one stitch before the end, pull it through, and then go back to the previous dot. Okay, and then I'm going to come up through the next dot, and then go back to the previous dot, come up the next dot. So with this, you're coming up, going back one stitch, and then basically going forward two. So you're going forward two, back one, forward two, back one, and this is as close as you're going to get when you're hand stitching to a machine stitch. I'm definitely going to have to replace my thread in a little bit, which is good because then I can show you how to do that if you start to run out, how you can start a new one. So again, up through the next dot, back to the previous one. Okay, so when you start to get to the end of your thread, I would go until you have about 1 inch left, and then I'm going to show you how to restart it. So I'm going to come up here, and then I'm going to go back there, and I'm at about 1 inch at this point. So what I'm going to do is turn it over and cut my needle off. Just hold on to that stitch there. I'm going to get a wingspan of thread. Any bigger than this is definitely going to give you some problems. Okay, so wingspan, cut it, take your needle and put your thread through the eye of the needle, and then you make your thread ends even with each other. So I'm going to make those even, and then I'm going to do a triple knot. So I'm going to go through both threads. I'm going to go through my loop, go through my loop again, and then go through my loop a third time. And by going the same loop 3 times, that's going to give you a triple knot that's on top of itself. One more. Okay, so when you have that, you know, and you can see that's a pretty big knot, so that'll be good. That won't go through the fabric. Okay, so if you had to stop, now I'm going to go back to the other side, and I'm not going to tie off the back yet. So what I'm going to do is come up at the next stitch, like just as if I was continuing, go back to the previous stitch just like I normally would. And now that I have a stitch in there, now I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to tie my old thread and my new thread together. And you do this by tying as if you were tying a pair of shoes, but instead of tying it in a bow, you're going to tie it in a double knot. Okay, so I have a knot there, and when I pull, it secures it there, and you can trim that if you want to. Okay, and then you basically just go back to stitching the way you were. So I'm going to go to the next corner so I can show you the next stitch. If you don't have a long enough thread to tie it to, I should have a chance to show you another way to knot it as well. So if that thread's too short, what I tell people to do is the end of the old thread, tie tie like you're tying shoes, but instead of a bow, tied in a double knot, just those 2 threads, and then you just start a new one. Okay, so I have one more left, and then I'm going to go to the corner for the next stitch, which is called a basting stitch. So sometimes you want to put your fabric together temporarily. So there's the back stitch. It's not perfectly straight, but the stitches should look double the length on the back. Okay, so then our last stitch around the edge is called a basting stitch, and this is probably the easiest one to do, but it's super loose. So you come up through one, you go into the next. You come up the next one, into the next. Now you can make these as big or small as you want, but the thing you've got to remember is you have lots of holes here, because everywhere there's no stitching, that is a hole. So what you could do, if you're confused about the back stitch, you could actually baste across the fabric, and then you could go back in the other direction and fill in those holes. A regular length on a sewing machine is 12 stitches per inch. So they are pretty small. So if you wanted to make it similar to a machine stitch, I would measure 12 little stitches per inch. So they're going to be between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch long. Okay, so I'm at my end of my side that's basting. So on this side, everywhere you see thread, on the back, there is no thread. And then on the place where there's thread here, there is no thread on this side. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the chain stitch. So the chain stitch, if you do this 100% correct, it will be like what's in the back of a men, or it's usually in the crotch seam of men's dress pants. If you take a stitch out, it literally just pulls out. I'm going to show you both ways to do it. One where it will be like that, but then it will end up coming out. And then one if you want it to look cool, but you don't want it to come out. So to do the chain stitch, I'm going to come up through my first dot, and then I'm going to go into the fabric right next to where the first one was. And then I'm going to, with that little loop that's there, I'm now going to come up through my next dot. And I'm going to make sure that I go through the 2 loops from the threads. And then I'm going to pull it. Now my 2 threads are not even right now, so I'm just going to pull the one to make it even. So it looks like a circle in there. So to do an accurate chain stitch the way it's supposed to be, when I go back into the fabric, I need to go back inside of that circle. Okay? And so the same thing is, I'm going to pull this until the circle is small, and sometimes it gets a little tangled. And now I'm going to, again, come up through the next dot that I have. And I'm going to make sure that I go through the 2 circles. Okay, when you're doing this stitch, it's important that you pull to the right if you're sewing to the right, otherwise your stitches will disappear. So mine are uneven again. Okay, so if I pull this out, that would go out. Now, if you don't want it to come out, what you can do is, instead of going into the dot inside of that circle, you can move the circle off to the side and go into the dot outside of the circle, and that'll kind of put a stitch in place to hold it. And so then I'm going to come up the next dot and through the loop. The chain stitch is kind of cool if you wanted to write letters in something, because you can basically do them tight, and it could make a cool design. So that's basically the chain stitch. So the last stitch I want to show you is a decorative one. It's called an arrow tack. It's kind of cool looking, and it would be a good thing to do if you wanted if you wanted to have some decoration or trying to cover a hole. So with the arrow tack, what you do is you come up in the corner of your triangle. If I can get as close to the corner as I want. And then you're going to come up to the point and you're going to go to the right side of the point. Okay, so I'm going to the right side, pretty close to the point. Then I'm going to come out right next to where I just was. And then I'm going to move over to the other corner of the triangle. So at the top, you'll see I have a little X where these stitches are. So then I'm going to move back to the first corner, but I'm going to come to the left a little bit, and the closer you do these together, the tighter it'll be. Then I'm going to come back up here next to my stitch that I did a second ago. So you'll see I have 2 lines next to each other. Then I'm going to come over here to the other side of the triangle. And then I'm going to come back to this corner. And so when you do this, the triangle starts to look really cool. So I'm going to come back down here. So again, the closer you do them to each other, the less that would be missing. But having a triangle marked on your fabric is really helpful because then you can make sure that you are making a triangle. So just think about if you had a little hole in something, you could add this decorative stitch onto it. And then I'll show you what the back looks like so you can see if you're doing it correctly. So the key is when you're doing this too, that the left side of the triangle and the right side of the triangle do look pretty even with each other. If they're not, then your triangle is going to be a little bit lopsided whenever you're done. Oops, almost made a mistake. Okay, so when you look at the back of this, it's just going to look like it'll look like a Christmas tree basically. So these are where I'm going across the top of the triangle, but I'm always going along the bottom because I'm going from the left side to the right side pretty much every time that I do this. Okay, so again, you come up left side of the triangle on the inside, come up to the top right, come out the top left, go into the bottom left. And my thread is becoming too short, so I am not going to be able to finish it. I'll post a picture once I'm done. I'll get a new thread and finish it. But I definitely wanted to just show you all those stitches. So I did want to mention there's a company called Start to Sew. And again, these are the kits that I would get for my 6th graders. Everything that you need to sew is included in this kit. This lady is based in Lafayette, Indiana. And I'll put the link to her Facebook page. They're a smaller company, but she said, I called her this morning to ask if she was still shipping because I didn't want to mention it if she wasn't. So I'll put a link to her Facebook page. She's super nice. These are only $5 a piece. Inside, you get, I think there's like 15 or 20 different stuffed animals. They're super cute. And it doesn't involve a machine. So it would be good practice for you if you want to do it. It's also good practice for the kids. So there's an instruction manual, and it gives some tips for some of the stitches. And then you'll see on the inside there's a pattern for all the pieces that you need. So it does tell you what the different things are, what colors that you cut them out of. And then there's also some instructions in here that tell you how to fit all your pieces on the specific pieces of felt. So definitely make sure you go through there. It's super nice and convenient because she includes all the felt that you need. So this is a cow. So it needs white felt, black felt, tan felt. She also includes embroidery floss. So this is like 6 individual threads that are put together. And she includes a larger hand sewing needle, which makes it nice to fit them in there. You could sew with all 6 strands together, but the directions tell you to just take 2 of the strands off and sew with those. But these have been great, and my 6th graders have really liked it. So if you're bored and looking for something to do and want to support a small business, I would definitely recommend contacting Sabrina Cassidy at Start to Sew. She does have some other products too, so if you look on the Facebook page, I believe there's might be pillow kits and stuff like that. But these are the Felt Friends, and they seem to be pretty popular. So hopefully some of you will order from her. I'm not getting anything from her for saying it. I just wanted to just, you know, shout out to a small business that's been great in working with me. So I hope you learned something today. Show me your finished products if you do something. I'll post the picture of my little sample before I started and after. I'll post the info on this. And happy sewing!